I was standing in my own driveway when two men I had never seen before walked up wearing fake uniforms and flashing badges that didn't look right, telling me I was being detained for an HOA violation. Even as neighbors gathered and tried to speak up, phones coming out while the HOA woman stood back smiling, insisting rules mattered more than truth or law, not realizing that the man they were trying to arrest was not a random homeowner at all but the chief of police himself. So before I tell you what happened next, tell me where you're watching from and please hit subscribe for more stories where the good guys always win. I was standing in my own driveway when two men walked up in police uniforms. It was late afternoon, quiet, the kind of calm that makes any sudden noise stand out. One of them spoke first. He said my name like he already knew me. He said I was under arrest. He said it slowly, clearly, like he wanted everyone nearby to hear it. He said the HOA had called them. He said I was violating community rules. He did not say which rules. He did not say how. They stood close, too close. Their posture was stiff, rehearsed. They tried to look official, but something felt wrong immediately. Their uniforms looked almost right, but not quite. The fabric was cheap. The patches were slightly off. One badge reflected the light in a way real badges do. I noticed these things without reacting. Years of experience had taught me how to stay calm when something felt wrong. Neighbors began to come outside. Doors opened, curtains moved, people stepped onto porches and sidewalks. Someone across the street raised a phone. Another neighbor followed. Phones came out one by one, like a silent signal passing through the street. The men noticed the action and raised their voices. They wanted control. They wanted fear. One of them told me to turn around. He said it again when I didn't move. He said I needed to cooperate or things would get worse. I asked a simple question. I asked for their badge numbers. He ignored me. I asked which department they were from. He answered too quickly, then corrected himself. His partner stayed quiet, scanning T. He crowed instead of looking at me. I could hear people whispering. Someone said this didn't feel right. Someone else asked why the HOA was involved at all. The men did not answer any of them. They kept talking over everyone, repeating the same commands, growing louder each time. That was another red flag. Real officers do not need to shout to be heard. I stayed where I was. I kept my hands visible. I kept my voice steady. I asked again for identification. One of the men stepped closer and told me I was making things harder on myself. He said I should stop asking questions. That was when I knew for sure. Authority that cannot be questioned is not authority at all. The HOA representative appeared from down the sidewalk. She looked confident, almost proud. She told the neighbors that this was being handled. She said rules were rules. She said enforcement was necessary. She did not look at me once. She did not ask a single question. She believed she was in control. The crowd grew. More phones were recording now. People started asking louder questions. Why wasn't there a patrol car? Why didn't the uniforms match? Why were they refusing to identify themselves? The fake officers shifted their weight. One adjusted his belt nervously. The other kept glancing at his partner like he was waiting for a cue. I could feel the moment stretching. This was the point where intimidation either works or fails. They expected me to panic. They expected me to comply. They expected me to believe the costume. They had no idea who they were standing in front of. I took out my phone. I did not rush. I did not hide what I was doing. I dialed a number I knew by heart. I put the call on speaker. I said my name. I said my location. I said there were two individuals impersonating law enforcement officers in my driveway. I said there was an HOA representative present. I said there was a crowd of witnesses. The men froze. One of them told me to hang up. The other took a step back. The HOA woman suddenly started talking fast. She said there must be a misunderstanding. She said everyone should calm down. No one listened to her anymore. The street went quiet. Even the phones stopped moving. People waited. The fake officers looked smaller now. Their confidence drained away in seconds. They stopped giving orders. They stopped shouting. They started explaining. That was another mistake. I ended call and looked at them for the first time with direct focus. I told them to stay where they were. I told them not to move. My voice was calm, but it carried. They listened without realizing why. That was when I said it. I told them who I was. I told them my position. I told them they had just committed a serious crime in front of dozens of witnesses. I told them real officers were already on way. Their faces changed instantly. Color drained. Eyes widened. One of them swallowed hard. The other looked at the ground. The HOA representative stopped speaking altogether. She finally looked at me. Her confidence disappeared. Sirens could be heard in the distance, not loud yet, but close enough. The sound cut through the tension like a blade. A few neighbors gasped. Someone said, "Oh wow." Someone else said, "I knew it." The fake officers tried to step away. I told them again not to move. This time they obeyed completely. They did not argue. They did not threaten. They waited. As the first real patrol car turned onto the street, I looked around at the neighbors watching from their homes. I saw anger. I saw relief. I saw disbelief. I saw people realizing how close this situation had come to going very wrong. Before the officers even stepped out of their vehicles, the truth was already clear. This was never about rules. This was never about safety. This was about power. And the people who tried to abuse it had chosen the worst possible person to target. What happened in my driveway did not begin that afternoon. It did not begin with fake uniforms or raised voices. It began quietly, the way control usually does. It began with emails. It began with letters. It began with rules that kept changing. The HOA had always been strict, but after we moved in, something shifted. They started watching more closely. They commented on things they had ignored for years. They questioned where I parked. They questioned how long guests stayed. They questioned small details that had been problems before. Each notice was polite on the surface, but the tone underneath was sharp. It felt personal. I followed every rule. I made sure I did. I read the handbook more than once. I corrected things even when I disagreed with them. That should have satisfied them. Instead, it seemed to frustrate them. Compliance did not give them what they wanted. Control did. The HOA woman became a regular presence. She walked the neighborhood with a clipboard like it was a badge. She took pictures. She spoke loudly when she corrected people, as if she wanted an audience. She liked being seen. She liked being obeyed. She did not like being questioned. Neighbors noticed it too. People started talking quietly at first. They said she was targeting certain houses. They said she treated rules like weapons. They said if you push back even a little, things escalated fast. Most people stayed silent. They were afraid of fines. They were afraid of retaliation. That fear was exactly what gave her power. Things became worse after an HOA meeting where several residents raised concerns. They asked for clarification on enforcement. They asked why some violations were ignored while others were punished immediately. The HOA woman did not like those questions. Her answers were vague. Her smile was tight. She reminded everyone that the board had authority. After that meeting, the notices increased, not just for me, but for others who had spoken up. Trash cans, lawn height, decorations, parking. It was not about order anymore. It was about obedience. People started giving in just to make it up. Then my daughter got sick. Her heart condition was not new, but that period was especially hard. Some days she could barely make it from the couch to the porch. Sitting outside helped her breathe. The doctors encouraged calm, fresh air and rest. The porch became her safe place. That was when the HOA crossed a line they could not uncross. They said she was loitering. They said she was creating disturbance. They said neighbors had complained. None of that was true. Neighbors had been bringing her water. Neighbors had been checking on her. The HOA woman did not care. She said rules were rules. She said exceptions created weakness. When people tried to explain that a sick child needed rest, she dismissed them. When they asked for compassion, she called it favoritism. When they asked her to leave, she refused. That moment planted something dangerous in her mind. She realized she could stand in front of a crowd and still not be stopped. That was when the plan began to form. The HOA did not want discussions anymore. They did not want complaints. They did not want resistance. They wanted a show of force. They wanted to remind everyone who was in charge. Real police would not do the for them. Real police ask questions. Real police follow the law. The HOA wanted obedience without accountability. Someone suggested enforcement. Someone suggested off-duty officers. Someone suggested contracted security. The language was careful, but the intent was clear. They wanted uniforms. They wanted authority. They wanted fear. They did not check backgrounds properly. They did not verify credentials. They did not ask the questions that matter. They found men willing to wear uniforms and say the right words. That was enough for them. In their minds, appearance was authority. The HOA woman took charge of the plan. She coordinated, she scheduled, she told herself she was protecting the community, she ignored every warning sign along the way. She believed rules gave her immunity. They did not think about the legal consequences. They did not think about the risk. They did not think about the people they could hurt. They certainly did not think about who lived in the house they targeted. To them, I was just another homeowner who had not been broken yet. The night before it happened, neighbors noticed strange cars parked near the HOA office. They noticed unfamiliar faces walking around in uniform shirts that looked almost official. A few people felt uneasy. One neighbor considered calling the police but decided against it. They assumed the HOA had handled it properly. That assumption almost caused real harm. The HOA woman told a few people that enforcement was coming. She said it like a warning. She said it like a promise. She wanted fear to travel faster than facts. What she did not understand was that power borrowed is fragile. Authority without law collapses quickly, and intimidation only works when the target believes it. By the time the fake officers stepped into my driveway, the HOA believed they had already won. They thought the uniforms would end the conversation. They thought handcuffs would silence the neighborhood. They thought no one would dare question them. They were wrong. What they had actually done was expose everything. Their arrogance, their recklessness, their belief that rules mattered more than people, more than health, more than the law itself, and they had done it in front of witnesses. By the time the sirens grew louder at the end of the street, the HOA's big plan had already fallen apart. They just did not know it yet. The moment the fake officers stepped into my driveway, they believed they already had control. They believed the uniforms were enough. They believed the badges would silence questions. They believed people would look at the clothes, not the behavior. That belief was their greatest mistake. They stood with their feet spread wide, hands resting near their belts, trying to copy what they had seen on telev. One of them kept adjusting his radio, even though it was not connected to anything. The other avoided eye contact, scanning the crowd instead of focusing on me. Real officers are trained to observe calmly. These men were performing. They spoke in short commands. They did not explain anything. They did not listen. Every sentence ended like a threat. They said things would get worse if I did not cooperate. They said resistance would be noted. They said they were authorized to act. None of it was true. I asked simple questions again. I asked who their supervisor was. I asked which precinct they worked out of. I asked why there was no marked unit. Their answers conflicted. One said county, the other said city. When I pointed out the contradiction, they ignored me and repeated their ord. RS louder. That was when the neighbors became more vocal. Someone asked why the HOA was allowed to send police at all. Someone else asked why they refused to show credentials. A woman across the street said she knew real officers, and this did not look right. The crowd grew bolder as doubt spread. Fake authority depends on silence. Once people start speaking, it weakens fast. The HOA woman tried to regain control. She told everyone to step back. She said this was official business. She said the men had every right to be there. She spoke with confidence, but her voice carried strain now. She was no longer directing the scene, she was reacting to it. The fake officers noticed the shift too. One of them stepped closer to me again, invading my space. He told me this was my last warning. He said he would restrain me if I did not comply. His hand hovered near his cuffs, but he did not touch them. He hesitated. He was not trained for escalation. He only knew intimidation. I stayed calm. I kept my posture relaxed. I did not raise my voice. Calm unsettles people who rely on fear. It forces them to reveal themselves. The more I stayed composed, the more agitated they became. I noticed details others might miss. The radio cords were wrong. The patches were stitched poorly. The badge numbers were not engraved properly. The shoes were not regulation. Every small detail confirmed the truth. These were not officers. They were pretending. A neighbor stepped forward and asked for a badge number directly. The fake officer snapped back that it was none of his business. That response sealed it. Real officers understand public accountability. Fake ones fear it. The crowd started murmuring openly now. Phones were steady, held high, recording everything. The fake officers looked trapped between wanting to assert dominance and wanting to escape. They tried to do both at once, which made them look confused. One of them claimed they were there under special authority. When asked to explain, he could not. Another claimed there was paperwork. No paperwork was produced. Every lie created more questions. Every question exposed another crack. The HOA woman tried a new tactic. She accused the crowd of interfering. She said anyone recording would be reported. That threat backfired. More phones appeared. People do not like being told to stop watching. At that moment, the situation could have gone very wrong. When fake authority is challenged, it can become dangerous. People pretending to have power sometimes panic. Panic leads to poor decisions. I could see that tension building in their shoulders, in their breathing, in their eyes. That was why I decided it was time to end the performance. I told them clearly to step back. Not as a request, as a command. My voice changed slightly. It carried weight without volume. They reacted instantly. They stepped back without thinking. Training responds to authority even when the mind does not recognize it. That reaction told everyone watching what they really were. The crowd noticed too. People exchanged looks. Someone whispered that they listened without arguing. Someone else nodded. The illusion was breaking. One of the fake officers IED to laugh it off. He said everyone was overreacting. He said this was just procedure. His voice cracked halfway through the sentence. The other said nothing at all. He stared at the ground. The HOA woman finally realized she was losing control. She tried to step between us, talking fast, saying it could all be handled privately. She said there was no need for drama. She said this was being blow and of proportion. No one responded to her. The crowd had stopped listening. I took out my phone then, slowly, deliberately. I did not hide it. I did not rush. That small action shifted everything. The fake officers stiffened. They knew what was coming, even if they hoped it was not real. When I made the call, I spoke clearly. I described the situation exactly as it was. I used proper terminology. Why? I referenced statutes without naming them. Anyone with real experience would recognize the language immediately. The fake officers did too. One of them whispered something to the other. I could not hear it, but I did not need to. Panic has a sound even when it is quiet. The HOA woman tried to interrupt the call. I held up a hand. She stopped mid-sentence. That moment shocked her more than anything else. She was used to people obeying her. She was not used to being dismissed. When I ended the call, silence filled the street. No one spoke. Even the fake officers stayed still. They were waiting now, waiting for consequences. I told them again not to move. This time there was no resistance at all. They stood exactly where they were told. Their fake authority had completely collapsed. What remained was fear. As distant sirens became audible, the crowd exhaled. People started whispering again, but the tone had changed. This was no longer confusion. This was clarity. The fake officers understood it too. They were no longer pretending. They were bracing. Fake authority always fails the same way. It works only until it is questioned. It survives only while people are afraid to speak. CE light is shined on it. It crumbles quickly. Standing there, watching it happen in real time, I knew this chapter was ending. The next one would be about consequences. And this time, the uniforms would be real. The sirens grew louder with every passing second. At first, they were distant, almost uncertain, but soon there was no mistaking them. The sound rolled through the neighborhood, bouncing off houses and parked cars. People stopped whispering and started watching the end of the street. Everyone knew what that sound meant. Everyone knew something serious was about to happen. The fake officers heard T2. Their shoulders stiffened. One of them glanced toward his car, then back at me, as if calculating whether he could leave before anyone arrived. The others stayed frozen, eyes forward, breathing fast. Neither of them spoke anymore. They had run out of words. The HOA woman tried again to take control. She stepped forward and said this was getting out of hand. She said there was no need for ICE involvement. She said it was all a misunderstanding and could be resolved internally. Her voice shook slightly, though she tried to hide it. The crowd did not respond. They were no longer listening to her explanations. They were waiting for the truth. The first patrol car turned onto the street with its lights flashing, then another followed. The blue and red lights washed over the houses. Are the people standing on their lawns, over the fake uniforms that suddenly looked even more fake under real police lights. A third car pulled in behind them. The street was blocked. Real officers stepped out of their vehicles with calm, controlled movements. They scanned the scene the way trained professionals do, quickly and quietly. One of them recognized me immediately. His posture changed just a little, out of respect, out of understanding. He nodded without saying my name. That small gesture said everything. The fake officers looked relieved and terrified at the same time. Relief that someone else was now in charge. Terror because they knew exactly who that someone else was. The senior officer approached and asked what was going on. I gave a clear, factual explanation. I described the uniforms. I described the commands. I described the refusal to provide identification. I described the HOA's involvement. I did not raise my voice. I did not add emotion. Facts were more than enough. The officer turned to the two men and asked them for identification, real identification, not excuses, not stories, just documents. They hesitated. That hesitation was the answer. One of them reached into his pocket slowly and pulled out a laminated card. It looked like something printed at home. The officer examined it for less than a second before handing it back. He asked again, this time more firmly. The other man said he left his wallet in the car. The officer told him to retrieve it. He did not move. The HOA woman began talking rapidly. She said they were authorized contractors. She said, the HOA had the right to enforce rules. She said no one was trying to impersonate anyone. Her words tumbled over each other. The officers did not interrupt her. They let her speak. People often reveal more when they are not stopped. When she finished, the officer asked a single question. He asked whether the HOA had hired these men knowing they were not sworn law enforcement. The HOA woman paused. That pause was louder than any confession. The officer then explained calmly and clearly what impersonating a police officer meant under the law. He explained the penalties. He explained the seriousness. He explained that uniforms, badges, and commands all mattered. The fake officers listened with their heads down. The HOA woman stared straight ahead, her face pale. One of the fake officers, Fina, Lee spoke. He said they were just doing what they were told. He said they were hired for enforcement. He said they did not think it was illegal. The officer told him ignorance did not change the law. Handcuffs came out. This time, they were real. The sound of the cuffs closing was sharp and final. The crowd reacted immediately. Some people gasped. Some shook their heads. Some whispered that they had not believed the HOA had gone that far. Phones kept recording. No one looked away. The HOA woman tried to protest. She said this was excessive. She said she was just enforcing rules. She said she never meant for anyone to get arrested. The officer informed her that intent would be determined later. For now, they were investigating. Another officer asked to speak with her privately. She followed him a few steps away, still talking, still explaining, still trying to control the narrative. It did not work. Authority had shifted completely. Neighbors were asked to provide statements. People stepped forward willingly. They described what they saw. They described what they heard. They described how the fake officers behaved. They described how the HOA woman refused to stop even when asked. Truth was no longer a single voice. It was a chorus. I watched all of this quietly. This was not about revenge. This was about accountability. When power is abused, it must be corrected, not loudly, not angrily, properly. The fake officers were placed into separate patrol cars. As they were guided away, one of them looked back at the neighborhood. His expression was empty. The performance was reality had replaced it. The HOA woman was told she was not under arrest at that moment, but that the investigation was ongoing. She nodded stiffly, as if trying to preserve what little dignity she had left. She did not look at me. The patrol cars prepared to leave. Officers thanked the neighbors for cooperating. They reassured everyone that the situation was under control. Slowly, people begged and to relax. The tension that had hung over the streets started to lift. As the last patrol car drove away, the neighborhood was quiet again. But it was a different kind of quiet. It was the quiet that comes after the truth is exposed. People approached me. They thanked me. They said they were scared to speak up before. They said they were glad someone finally did. I listened. I told them they had done the right thing by recording and asking questions. Accountability depends on witnesses. Standing there, I knew this was not the end. The truth had come out, but consequences take time. Paperwork would follow. Investigations would continue. Decisions would be made. But one thing was already clear. The HOA's authority had been built on fear, and fear had just lost. By the time the first real patrol cars fully settled into place, The entire mood of the street had changed. What had begun as confusion and intimidation had transformed into clarity and accountability. The flashing lights were no longer just a spectacle, they were a statement. This situation was now in the hands of people who actually understood the law. The officers moved with calm precision. There was no shouting, there was no rushing. Every movement was deliberate. One officer controlled the scene while another spoke with witnesses. A third monitored the HOA woman, who stood rigid near the sidewalk, her arms crossed tightly as if holding herself together. The neighbors noticed the difference immediately. Real police did not need to raise their voices to command attention. They did not need threats. Their presence alone carried authority because it was earned, not borrowed. People felt safer just watching them work. One officer walked over to the fake patrol vehicle parked near the curb. He examined it carefully. The decals were almost convincing but not quite right. The lights were aftermarket. The plates were registered to a private individual, not a department. He photographed everything. Details matter. Every detail tells a story. Another officer spoke with the fake officers individually. He separated them so their stories could not align. He asked simple questions: names, departments, supervisors, training. Each answer created more contradictions. The men could not keep their lies straight. They had rehearsed intimidation, not investigation. The HOA woman watched it unfold with growing panic. She attempted to step in more than once, insisting she had paperwork that justified everything. Each time she was calmly told to wait. That word unsettled her more than anger ever could. Wait meant she no longer controlled the pace. Statements were taken carefully. Neighbors described how the fake officers arrived without warning. They described the commands, the THR, eats, and the refusal to provide identification. They described how the HOA woman encouraged the behavior instead of stopping it. No one exaggerated. They did not need to. The truth was strong enough on its own. Several neighbors mentioned my daughter. They described how the HOA woman had previously confronted a sick child resting on her own porch. They described how compassion was dismissed as weakness. The officers listened closely. That context mattered. It showed a pattern, not an accident. An officer asked me if I wished to make a formal complaint. I told him I wished to make a formal report. There is a difference. Complaints express dissatisfaction. Reports establish facts. He nodded in understanding. While paperwork was being completed, more marked units arrived. A supervisor stepped out of one vehicle and assessed the scene. He spoke quietly with the responding officers, reviewed notes, and observed the demeanor of everyone involved. After a few minutes, he gave clear instructions. The investigation would expand. The fake officers were informed they were being detained pending further questioning. They were read their rights, properly this time. One of them sighed heavily, if the weight of reality had finally settled in. The other stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, avoiding every camera. The HOA woman was informed she was required to provide all contracts, emails, and communications related to the incident. She tried to argue that it was unnecessary. The supervisor informed her it was not optional. Her shoulders slumped slightly. For the first time, she looked small. Neighbors continued recording, but the tone had shifted. This was no longer shocking entertainment. This was documentation. People understood that what they were witnessing mattered beyond that day. It mattered for accountability. One officer approached me privately. He asked if my family was safe. He asked specifically about my daughter. That question reminded me why this situation had struck such a deep nerve. Rules are meaningless if they ignore humanity. Enforcement without empathy becomes cruelty. I assured him she was resting inside, unaware of the full scale of what had just occurred. I preferred it that way. Children should not carry the burden of adult power struggles. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, the flashing lights reflected off windows and windshields. The scene remained controlled. No one was rushed away. Everything was documented properly. This was how real authority operates: slow when necessary, firm when required. Eventually, the fake officers were placed into separate patrol cars, not hurried, not shoved, just escorted. The crowd watched in silence as the doors closed. That silence spoke volumes. This was not celebration. This was resolution. The HOA woman was told again that the investigation was ongoing and that further contact would be made. She asked if she was free to leave. She was told she was, for now. She walked away stiffly, avoiding eye contact with everyone she passed. The power she once displayed was gone. Officers remained on scene until every witness who wished to speak had done so. They answered questions calmly. They reassured residents that impersonation of law enforcement was taken extremely seriously. They thanked people for stepping forward. Gradually, neighbors returned to their homes. Doors closed, phones lowered. The street slowly returned to normal. But something fundamental had changed. The illusion of HOA dominance had been broken. Before leaving, the supervisor shook my hand. He said the department would handle the matter thoroughly. I told him I had no doubt. Accountability does not depend on rank, it depends on integrity. When the last patrol car finally drove away, the street fell quiet once more. The flashing lights disappeared. The echoes of sirens faded. What remained was understanding. That day was not about proving who I was, it was about reminding everyone what real authority looks like. It protects. It listens. It answers questions. It does not hide behind costumes or threats. And for the first time in a long while, the neighborhood felt safe again. In the days that followed, the neighborhood felt different. It was not just quieter, it was lighter. People walked a little slower. They spoke to each other more openly. There was a sense that something heavy had been lifted, something that had been pressing down on everyone without them fully realizing it. News of what happened spread quickly. Not through gossip, but through shared experience. Neighbors compared notes. They talked about moments when they had felt intimidated. They talked about fines they had paid without question. They talked about times they had wanted to speak up but were afraid of retaliation. For the first time, they were no longer afraid to say those things out loud. The HOA board called an emergency meeting. Attendance was higher than it had ever been. People filled the room. Some stood along the walls, others waited outside. The mood was not angry, but it was serious. People were done being ignored. The HOA woman was not there. Her absence was noticed immediately. Board members tried to proceed with routine business, but the crowd did not allow it. Questions came one after another. Who approved the fake officers? Who signed the contracts? Who thought it was acceptable to intimidate residents? Silence followed each question. Eventually, answers came. Not good ones, not complete ones, but enough to confirm what everyone already suspected. Power had been abused. Oversight had failed. Rules had been used as weapons instead of guidelines. That admission alone changed everything. Within weeks, investigations moved forward. Charges related to impersonating law enforcement were filed. Civil actions followed. Lawyers became involved. Emails and messages that were never meant to be seen were suddenly part of official records. Intent was no longer hidden behind polite language. The HOA woman signed before she could be formally removed. Her resignation letter was brief. It contained no apology. It did not matter. Accountability does not require remorse. It requires consequence. New leadership was elected. Policies were reviewed line by line. Enforcement procedures were rewritten with clear limits. Training was mandated. Transparency became a requirement, not a suggestion. For the first time, the HOA worked for the residents instead of ruling over them. Neighbors who had once avoided meetings now attended regularly. They asked questions. They demanded explanations. They understood something important now. Authority exists to serve, not to dominate. When people participate, abuse has nowhere to hide. For me, the lesson was personal as well. Being a police chief does not mean I am immune to intimidation. It does not mean my family is protected from cruelty. That day reminded me that power, when unchecked, targets the vulnerable first. A sick child on a porch should never be treated like a violation. My daughter recovered slowly. She never fully understood what happened, and I was grateful for that. She only knew that neighbors waved more often, that people led at her, that the porch felt safe again. That was enough. I also learned how important it is for ordinary people to speak up. The neighbors who recorded, the ones who asked questions, the ones who refused to look away, they made the difference. Without them, the truth could have been twisted. Silence is what allows abuse to grow. Law enforcement exists to protect people, not rules written with context. When uniforms are worn without integrity, they become dangerous. When authority is claimed without accountability, it collapses eventually. It always does. This story did not end with applause or celebration. It ended with understanding. It ended with systems being corrected. It ended with a community stronger than it was before. The biggest lesson was simple. Rules do not matter more than people. Authority does not come from a badge you buy or a title you demand. Real power comes from responsibility, restraint, and respect for human dignity. The HOA learned that lesson the hard way. The neighborhood learned it together, and anyone watching learned something too. Sometimes the people you try to intimidate are the very ones who uphold the law. And sometimes when the good guys stand their ground, everyone wins.